Hello everybody. Today I'm going to do something that I haven't done in a very, very long time. I'm going to do a vlog. Um, why? Well, I've been inspired, and I have been inspired by something that um, I hadn't known existed. I mean, one could argue, well, you spend so much time on the internet, you have had a YouTube channel for 10 years. Maybe you should have just thought that this kind of YouTube tag, namely booktube, existed. Yeah, that's right. Maybe I should have, but I didn't. And that's not because I don't read. I read loads. And when I moved back to Germany, I had to ditch parts of my book collection, just like I had to ditch a large part of my games collection simply because I didn't know where I was going to end up, like place-wise. I knew which city I was moving to, but I was moving from a house to a flat, and I didn't know how much space there would be. So basically, I ditched lots of games, and I also ditched some books. But most recently, I have picked up reading again at a very, very quick pace. Well, I've done a couple of things. First of all, I finished my degree last year. So since I want to say 15th of June last year, I haven't had to spend my weekends learning, studying, preparing, doing assignments. So I have a lot more time on my hands. At the same time, of course, I'm still mastering several games a week or a month. So I still am very engaged in the RPG world. And of course, when you master a game, you also have to do a lot of reading. So I would have been reading rule books. I would have been reading, of course, adventures. I would have been writing adventures. But something that I started last year was I started to write. And I've been writing stories since last year, which of course takes a lot of time as well. But it's also kind of like an active literary, I want to say, pastime. And it's a hobby, and I really enjoy it. But I've also started to read again. And I remember that pretty much this time last year, I was a bit afraid that I might never read again. Because I still had books that I hadn't read. The books are still there. I still haven't read them. And I was in London for the first time in my life. And we went to a bookshop called Waterstone. So those of you who've been there, it's huge. I love bookstores and I love Waterstones. And we were there and shopping was done. And I didn't buy a single book. Not a one. And not because there wasn't anything available. There would have been, I'm sure, something that I could have bought if I'd known what I'm looking for. But I just felt like, what if I'm never going to read again? I just had this feeling that for some reason that I couldn't fathom, I was never going to concentrate on reading again. But that has changed. So I have read several books since then. And most recently, I have been interested or become interested in Stephen King. There's a video about The Mist and the Body rendering at this very moment in the other room on my other laptop. And I've also started to watch videos on YouTube about reading, about literature, of course, people doing reviews, people having discussions. I started out with Stephen King, so the Kingslingers, for example, very good channel. It's Doof, I think, is the name of the channel, but they've got this these different playlists, Kingslingers, where they actually look at different. I want to say they've looked at probably everything he's ever written, and they do a week by week reading. So basically, you know exactly what they're going to read, and then they discuss it. And I think each discussion lasts about 1 to 1.5 to 2 hours. Really well done. I really love it. But I also came across other things. And one of them is a channel by a Dutch neurobiologist named Leonie. It's called The Book Leo. I'm going to link it. And she basically did a vlog, or actually an in-depth analysis on whether book Booktok, which is a subspace in TikTok, is ruining reading. So that was about a year ago that she published this. Apparently there was an article that was read by very many people, which basically said, the article said, reading has been destroyed by TikTok because it's always the same 20 books that get recommended, blah, blah, blah. And first of all, I've never been on TikTok. I don't have the app, so it's nothing that I could actually check because I'm unable to access it. And I also don't want to. I mean, there was no reason for me to try. But I realized that there is a whole world of channels that don't just discuss literature, don't just discuss books, but also show reading as an aesthetic piece. That there are videos where you can watch people rearrange their shelves, and I've watched those and I find them incredibly soothing because they have the same issues that I have. You have a series of books and you have all of the copies from 1 to 10, and then they decided that a book 8 should be taller than the other 9. And it makes me crazy. And I'm not somebody who's a terribly visual person, but when it comes to this, I want my books to have a uniform look. If it's the same series, they all have to look the same. And there's a caveat to this, and they should all have the same size. However, when I did the whole Stephen King thing, I really took the aesthetic, and I didn't realize that this was an aesthetic because I'm not a visual person and I have not the first notion of aesthetics, It has been improving. The other day, somebody said to me, I've known you for 25 years. I've never seen you accessorize in your home, because somebody gave me an accessory, which I put up because I really love it. But things have happened in my life which have meant that I'm suddenly paying attention to things that I never used to pay attention to. I've got an accent wall in the other room that matches my rug. Honestly, this is something that I wouldn't have done in the past, but we change, we grow. Even when you're 50, you can still change and grow. Anyway, so basically there is this whole aesthetic of people rearranging their bookshelves. There are videos where you can actually watch people read. I mean, just imagine. Reading is probably one of the most solipsistic pastimes, unless you're reading to someone. You're sitting there with your book, you're completely immersed in the book world, in the world that the book is showing you. And it's probably the least communicative way of spending your time. Having said this, I love reading, and I used to live in a household with some people, my mother, for example, and sometimes also my father, and we would be reading next to each other. Everybody would be reading their own book, but it was a communal experience in a way as well. So I'm completely down with sitting in the same room with other people and just doing quiet reading, and I still feel it's a little bit like painting miniatures. I had this one friend in Ireland, and I would go to his house and I would bring my painting equipment and my miniature suitcase, and then I would put it down and he would put down his stuff, and then we would just get water from his tap and we would just paint away. Usually not talking at all for hours, but the fact that we were doing the same thing in the same space, perfect. Anyway, so there are videos where you can watch people read. They're really like time lapses of people sitting there reading. And I had no idea. And I have to say, I find it utterly soothing to watch some of these videos because, they start with somebody making tea, lighting a candle, making maybe even a snack, even maybe throwing some cooking into the whole mix, and then sitting there, and maybe some shots and B-roll of the world outside their window mixed in, some nice underlying music, and you kind of go, and this is not something that you can just basically listen to in the background because they're usually not talking. So you really have to watch. And I'm like, this is like watching a cookery show, which I love. I love watching people cook. Nigella, the Barefoot Contessa, I really love those shows. But it's like that. And I was completely unaware of this whole thing. And I've now subscribed to various of these channels because I'm like, I really want to get into this because it is kind of like, I'm not going to do it myself, but it's just really chilling in a way. And then basically I learned something also about about not new, but new to me, genres. So for example, there's a whole genre, young adult dystopian literature. I had no idea. I mean, I had heard of the Hunger Games. I've never read it. I've never watched the movies. Not because I'm not interested, not because I think it's trash or whatever. It's just, I basically was like, I don't know. I also never watched or read Twilight. Again, I do like vampires, but it was just not something that I was terribly interested in. And again, this is just me. It's just when they came out, vampires weren't really at the forefront of my mind. And I came across a genre that I'd never heard. I mean, I had heard of young adult. I knew about fantasy. Heck, I have hundreds of fantasy books, some of which are quite old actually as well, 80s, like the Dragonlance novels. And then I came across a genre that I'd never really heard of before, dark academia. And not only is dark academia books and also films, like for example, Dead Poets Society would be a dark academia film. Picture of Dorian Gray would be a dark academia classical novel. I would go so far as to say The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco is also a dark academia book. Also, in my opinion, Oxford Blood by Antonia Fraser, although I never see these two mentioned, but I honestly, when I look at how dark academia is defined, it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to have an academic background, it doesn't have to be set at a university or even a school. It can be, like, you know, I understand that what's it called? The Atlas 6 or whatever, there's a book called The Atlases, something like that, where it's about six people competing for 5 places in the Secret Service or something. That's definitely not academic in any way in terms of there is no school involved, there is no university involved, but it's still dark academia. Quite often there is some kind of magic involved because apparently they do magic in the 9th house. There is magic and demons and stuff. Of course, there is magic to a certain degree in the Picture of Dorian Gray, but also there are movies like Dead Poets Society where there is no magic, but where you definitely have academia. I would even say that Heathers is probably dark academia, come to think of it. You've got the school, you've got the group of girls, new one comes in, there is a murder, you know, and it's all kind of like really elitist because this is something that seems to be very dark academia, that you have some form of elite and there is somebody coming in and usually a crime happens, at least one. So it's just totally fascinating, but it doesn't stop there. It's not just books and films, but there's also music that's associated with it. You can go to Spotify and there are curated playlists, dark academia playlists. There is a dark academia aesthetic. There are pictures that are associated with it, forms of dress that are associated with it. And if I manage to find a dark academia bona fide background, I'm going to use it here. And I was like, totally, there is this whole world out there. So the reason why I'm doing this vlog is because I'm like, wow, I am now completely on board. I've ordered a couple of dark academia books, so The 9th House, but also a dark academia collection of short stories. I think there's 10 short stories, comes in at €19, so you can't go wrong there. Beautifully bound hardcover book. Because I'm also, when it comes to books, I like them to look nice, or I have an aesthetic of, if I can't have books that look alike out of a series, because maybe the series doesn't exist anymore, or maybe I'm thrifting, so I'm buying secondhand. And I bought all of my Stephen King's that I have, all of them are secondhand. None of them is a new book. There, my aesthetic is, I want them to be different. So for example, the Dark Tower series that I have, it's 8 books and only 2 of them look alike because they come from the same series. The other ones all look different, and that's an aesthetic onto itself, you know. But it's just this, I was just so blown away, because to me it was complete news that reading is now a lifestyle choice. Because to me, reading was always something that you do because you want to know more. You want to know about either non-fiction, new stuff. You want to enter somebody else's world. You want to experience a world that is different from yours. Let's say you read Toni Morrison, which is a very different experience if you're not Black, if you don't live in the United States, and if you don't live when most of her books are set, or didn't live, you know, there is stuff there that you will not know yourself, and you can experience it through that book. Or you can, you know, experience Roman Britain in The Lantern Bearers or Eagle of the Ninth, young adult fiction. You can experience stuff that doesn't exist, like The Lord of the Rings, the Norse sagas, you know. So that was what reading was to me. But apparently now reading is also a hobby that people project out. And they call themselves readers. I've also come across the term constant reader, which was a new word for me completely. I still don't know what this means if you're a constant reader. But it is a thing where people say, I'm a reader, and I say it about myself because it says something to other people, and there are certain people that are readers too, and I want to connect to them. It's like in the RPG community, if you're a tabletop role player, that says something about you, and you project it outwards by, I don't know, joining different Discord servers, etc., to find people who are like-minded. And that is something that I don't remember from when I was young, because everybody was reading. There were more the people who didn't read, and that was the weird thing. And when you listen to my Stephen King, me and Stephen King video, I actually talk about this, that we had to do a book presentation, and the one girl there were some people who were outcasts in my class. I was one of them, she was one of them, but we were outcasts for different reasons. She was a heavy metal fan, and she was like, you know, hanging out with the long-haired guys, drinking alcohol, smoking, you know. And then we had to do a book presentation. And I remember her coming in and just putting her bag on the desk. I was sitting in the front row, and then she takes out this huge volume, It, by Stephen King. In German, it's 1,500 pages. And I was like, she read that? I mean, I didn't even know that she read for fun, but I mean, that's like, you know, reading that for fun, that's dedication. She not only read it once, she'd read it twice. She had made copious notes, and she gave a brilliant book presentation. So it was more like, oh yeah, she does read. It's just that back then people would have considered Stephen King trash, which is of course wrong. But this idea of reading was never something that you would project outward, because it was something that people do. It's, you know. And I remember a time when you were told by so-called HR professionals that when you write your letter, because your application letter, you're supposed to add your personal brand. That's something that happened, I think, during the 10s, maybe late noughties, early 10s of the 21st century. You have to have a brand. You have to brand yourself, you know, because there are so many people competing for the same job. And, you know, just having the qualifications, the academic or non-academic qualifications isn't enough. You have to have a personal brand. And I remember it was a big thing in my company as well. And then basically, you provide information about yourself, and one of them is your hobbies. And they said, never write that you read, because that makes you sound boring. It seems like this has changed incredibly. If now reading is a thing, there's a whole aesthetic around reading. And I also have to say, yeah, and also, why should anyone get to judge somebody else's hobbies, whether they are boring or not? It's part of your person, and reading is anything but boring. But now you have hundreds of thousands of videos to prove that people take reading and turn it into an art form that leaps off the page. And I am so incredibly fascinated by this that I just had to make this video about this. So this is a complete ramble. If you listen to this this far, and if you listen to the whole thing, then thank you very much. Leave a like, subscribe, and check out all of those lovely vlogs and video channels that deal with reading. And yeah, and maybe listen to some of my reviews, because I am going to start reviewing books more often. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon. Bye.